Hi, and welcome back. We are getting ready to kick off another session here, but before we do, let me let you know what's coming up this afternoon. Lori Jones with Avocet's going to step in and take the moderator role, so we're looking forward to that. And the topics are going to be at noon, how to counter the Great Recession. So that's about the big talent tsunami that we talk about, I believe. And then at 1 is a panel with heart-centered leadership continues. And then rounding out the day at 2 will be entrepreneurial leadership realities. So some really great sessions, and we'll look forward to having Lori come in as the moderator. Let me give a shout out again to our sponsors, ARC Thrift Store, Avocet Communications, Ward Electric Company, and Longmont Economic Development Partnerships, all at the platinum level. Gold level is our friends over at Biz West, and Left Hand Brewery and Docketly. I don't know who Docket Set is. They didn't sponsor, but Docketly did. At the connected level is downtown Longmont, and our friends over at Longmont are at High Plains Bank. And then in-kind sponsors were given by Handprint Inc. and Circle Graphics, Sticker Giant, and Chop 5. So I'm Beth Smith. I'm the CEO at Sticker Giant, and I'm also the founder of Boulder Mindful Living. And we have a great panel here today. What I'd like to do is have each panelist introduce themselves, and they will also introduce themselves with their pronouns. Mine are they, she. Pronouns help folks understand how we identify in our gender identity. So it's really helpful for folks that are non-binary and not in the gender continuum in a traditional way to hear all of us really say where we are in our gender identity. So, Regina, will you kick us off?
Sure. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Regina Smith. My pronouns are she, her, and I currently am the Vice President for Mission, Culture, and Inclusive Community at Naropa. I also do equity-informed executive coaching and other work in the community.
Wonderful.
My name is Marty Moore, and I use the pronouns of she and her. Thank you for asking, Beth, and making that a part of today. And if you didn't get enough of me last hour, here I am again. I'm the Executive Director of Boulder County.
Lovely.
And I am Angie Robinson, pronouns she, her, hers. I am currently working on my PhD in employee experience and employee life cycle.
And I'm Amy Zuckerman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a fellow with the CEO Action for Racial Equity, which focuses on new and improved public policy, lifting up the lives of our 47 million Black Americans.
Wonderful. So this is a really particular honor for me. Marty and Amy and I have been friends for quite some time, and I have new friends in Regina and Angie, so we're so glad to have you here. And a particular, too, is inviting in a university here locally to this business conversation, and an alma mater of mine, so we're really glad to have you here with us, Regina, to join this conversation. So what we thought we would do is really take apart the DEIB and A letters, the acronyms, and have our panelists really engage on those different topics. And then we'll switch after we do that to talk about how COVID has really impacted diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. So let's start with D, right? Diversity. And we got some great information in the tips earlier this morning, but I think it's really important that we put personal voices to these. I mean, you can go out and you can Google them, you can take classes on these things, but I would really just love to hear, as we go through each one of these letters and and the acronym, what that actually means to you personally, right? On a real personal level. So I'm going to let the first person with a microphone to their mouth begin.
Well,
thank you, Amy.
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
So I'll take the D. So in the presentation that Angie and I led together, I explained how for organizations, diversity really is about measurement. Diversity really is about counting. I'll say that and kind of have that boundary around it. people use the word diversity all the time, and I think they mean perhaps two things. Well, I would like them to think about two things. One is diversity of thought, and then also diversity of identity. So I think both things are important to organizations. I think, you mentioned personal. When I'm on a team, it's always fun to have people like you. That's fun. You've got probably the same cultural touchstones and words and phrases and all that kind of stuff. But really, if I'm thinking about the efficacy of the team and the outputs of the team, I want diversity of thought. If I'm going to build a widget, I want 6 people sitting around and saying, have you thought about this? Or my concern is, or an innovation we might try is this. That's what I'm looking for with that. But I don't want to minimize the conversation that the world should be having and hopefully is having around diversity of identity. And the social movements, if you will, that are happening today, honestly, have always been happening. This is not new. Protests are not new. And in fact, I'm going to pass the mic and the torch really soon because I realize I'm going down a deep well of passion. I may not come back from, so I'm going to pull us back up. But I do believe when we talk about diversity and we talk about change and we talk about social movements, I don't believe much has ever really happened in this country without social protests, from worker rights to employing children. And there are, of course, some wonderful historical resources where we can learn about the role of citizens speaking up in this country to make our country better, if not perfect. Certainly, we're always a work in progress. Yeah. I'm going to put a pin in it there. So D for me.
D. All right. Thank you for that. Riffing on diversity, I think Amy covered some good ground there.
So I think I'm gonna jump on this one. So I love what you're saying about diversity of identity, and that's really, to me, that's really kind of the point of how you get to diversity of thought, is that you have to bring some people in that have other experiences, that have, that we all didn't come down that, like that picture that I showed in the front of the slide deck, where it's just like a bunch of white guys all had the same experiences, did that same thing, all work at IBM, all work at NASA, all do, it's like, no, we don't all have all that same thing, and we come with different kinds of intelligences and experiences and ways to communicate and ways to relate to each other and ways to understand problems. I think one of the things that I've learned my entire life is that I think completely differently than anybody else I know. I will dissect a math problem completely differently than anybody I know, right? And that matters. And that's personal to me, but it's also part of what I learned in my life and what I got from my environment and the experiences that I've had over my life. So, understanding that and tying those things together, that it's that, my identities that I bring a wealth of other experience and knowledge with me, including things like, one of the things, I just want to throw this out because it happens all the time. It's around communication, where it's like, when I talk to my family, it's loud. Everything's loud. We're talking loud, and nobody's mad. That's how it is, right? And but you can't carry that into our workplaces because everything's calm and we don't ever raise your voice, and you don't even look at people askance because But it's like communication is different, and it's hard for me to tie that thing down and hold it. And I need to be able to express myself, and that differences of expression and differences Beautiful. Of how we are actually speaking to each other and trying to get to results that we're trying to achieve.
I'll just say I love that, because the way we express ourselves is tied to our identity, right? And culturally, and the way we're raised, the experiences we've had, we express ourselves extremely different. So thank you so much for bringing that in. Please, Regina.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say I had a work experience earlier in my career where one of my white-identified coworkers did say that every time that I spoke, she felt like I had like an emotional charge to what I was sharing. And I was like, well, actually, if you were at a family reunion of mine, or if you were in a room full of me and my cousins, I'm the most soft-spoken one in my whole family. So clearly there's a cultural difference that you're then overlaying with an interpretation because you don't have a lot of experience working on diverse teams. And so I do think that diversity is the starting point for a lot of the other things that we're looking for in organizations, such as inclusivity and belonging. But you can't have belonging if you only have a few people who express themselves in a certain way. And I wrote an article on how professionalism is actually based on norms that are not culturally inclusive. And so things that we may consider unprofessional, like, why are you so passionate when you're speaking? That's not professional. It's like, actually, that's just not, you know, a white cultural norm or a male cultural norm. And so I think if we want to get to organizations and places where people feel like they can contribute and speak up and bring their best self to work, then we have to have more than just a few or tokenized representation. And I'll also say within higher education, diversity is important because we see that retention of students of color is really based on if they see faculty that reflect them and if they see other staff members and they say, oh, this is possible for me. And if you don't have diverse faculty and staff, then you're less likely to be able to retain both staff members who bring cultural diversity, but also students.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. Thank you. Marty?
As a white person, I have to share an experience. So in response to Angie and Regina's comment, so we just had a staff retreat. And our staff is diverse. There's 10 of us, and I think, I don't know, 4 or 5 people are folks of color. And so we were at this retreat. We had money from the Colorado Health Foundation, so we were in Estes Park at this nice place. It was so loud. And I was like, oh my God, it is so loud. I took my hearing aids out, and I'm like, I have to move away. They were having so much fun. It was all appropriate. But when I went out, like, down the street and I could hear them, I'm like, we are in a complex. So we have to have some respect. But it was new for out Boulder County to have that level of sound, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. I think we're touching again on some of the things we touched about earlier in the morning around having to feel uncomfortable, right? This is not going to make you feel comfortable to be all like, oh, let's get diverse here. You need to know what you're signing up for, right? And I'm really passionate about it because I think a lot of people are well-intended, and then once they get on the journey gets challenging, right? And so I think that's, but it gets rich, right? If you can stay in the discomfort that comes up and learn more and then follow that through. I think, Amy, you were saying that this morning around a colleague of yours that shared that they didn't have someone in their life that they didn't have a lot of experience with diversity around veterans, right? So when we hear someone say, hey, that's me, do we take the next step to go actually find an author that wrote a book about African American culture, or watch a movie intentionally that really like gives us the fabric of what it's like to be in some different cultures, Asian cultures, LGBTQ, what are trans people's experiences? So I think it really calls us into our own self-exploration to be able to pick up this idea of diversity rather than, okay, we're represented now, we look like our community. We'll get into the sense of belonging and how we get to an inclusion. That's just table stakes. But how do we care for people once we bring them in, right? How do we care for difference, and how do we appreciate it? So let's move then to DE, equity. What do we mean by equity? And Amy or Angie, if you want to jump in, because your presentation had pieces of this, right?
I can start a little bit and pass to you after. So I think equity has come up in conversations I've been near to, is around pay equity. So how do people with the same amount of experience, same amount of education, get paid the same? Now, we Americans, I have heard said that our core cultural value in the U.S. is fairness. We want things to be fair. So this is a no-brainer. I think probably most. I'm gonna say. I think most of the population thinks that we have equity in this country, thinks that there's no discrimination, except if you have are connected to stories and experiences where that hasn't been the case. From the workplace, people might find this interesting. When the notion of gender pay equity came to the fore, there are certain large tech companies that immediately did intense analyses of pay at their work and gave women raises. A bunch of women got raises. They went across the board and they said, wow, we've got a vulnerability here. We've got risk here. And some of that was publicized. A lot of it wasn't, because, of course, when you say, oh, we had a problem, we fixed it, guess what? People are like, what other problems do you have? So I think about equity in there, just to share a little bit on the corporate side. But Angie, hand it to you.
Thanks. So, I think about equity in a lot of different ways, because what I see and what I find is that, okay, I'm an engineer. I have spent a lot of time in rooms with a bunch of white guys. In school, in my professional life, that's what I do, and I'm always scratching my head, going, where are the rest of me? Like, where are my peeps? Why aren't there more of me in this room? And there are lots of things. Without going too far down the rabbit hole, even when kind of what the slides that I was addressing earlier, that even when we say, okay, we're going to give everybody the same resources, everybody's going to have Microsoft Excel on their laptop. And it's just like, okay, well, you have an Apple Wingding Buzz thing, and I have a little crappy iPad that I inherited from my brother, right? It's like, the disparity in what different people might have to even access that awesome resource you gave them with is huge, and you don't even know that. You don't even know how to recognize that, or ask about that, or know what that's about. In the ERG conversation, to say, okay, everybody has an ERG, but we don't all know how to use that ERG. We don't all know how to, pull the levers that make that thing work for us in ways that we need it. So I've been seeing people talk about, making sure that the allies get education and the allies get, understanding of who we are. But, it's like, I really want to see, and I want some professional training and some leadership training and some, and some of that extra money for being a leader of an ERG, and some of all that stuff that is all about how we make it equitable for us all to be participating, and that we find the ways to absolutely get rid of the barriers that are there, rather than just like make it able for us all to see over the barrier. But we're actually figuring out, how do we get rid of the barriers so that we're all playing at the table. There, we're not even on the playing field isn't level. We're not on the same playing field. We're on completely, everything's different. It's there's a pretense, as you say, that there's fairness, and it's like, there ain't nothing fair. There ain't nothing fair about any of this, right? So, I could keep going, but I won't. I really, there are so many things that are just at the foundational level that are unfair, that make it really difficult, that when you even just come up for air, like, understanding study habits. You get into school, but you don't know how to study. You don't have the support that your family might have, because you're the first generation, person in school, or, like I've been working on my PhD for the last 9,000 years, and it's like, it might have been different had I had more educated people around me providing me with that support and helping me understand what some of the pitfalls were, and so on. So I think it's from every level, nothing is fair. So, every step forward is I'm still not at, I have the same education level, I still have the same, background, whatever, okay, I'm getting the same pay, and I'm still not at the same level with the people that I'm working with. Yeah. And the equity is, I think this is the hardest part of it, is really getting to some place where the barriers are removed and we all feel like we are participating and able to participate at the same level.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is just so important, because we want to believe it's fair, right? And so again, I go back often to the way we work with our minds, right? And the truth of the experience is we get seduced into wanting to believe things are fair so much that then we trick ourselves into believing that they are, and we can look the other way. And we're at a point where we can't trick ourselves anymore, right? The truth of it is it is not fair, and we have work to do. Amy?
I wonder if that's a white perspective, because I'm resonating with it in this moment, and I'm also balancing what I've heard from Black colleagues, particularly since I work on a lot of Black American issues, that it's heartbreaking, perhaps, as white people to realize, gosh, we thought the world was one way, and you know what? It is not, and I mean that with grave seriousness. Yes. I have heard, and well, perhaps this is my own theory, that one of the things that a bunch of white people learned in the last year and a half, and this is maybe a philosophy thing for the deep thinkers at the table, but that other people are having a very different experience of life in this country, and one that I personally, as a white person, I will never have. I will never share that. And so here comes my responsibility, Marty, referring to your session.
Well, and I only know fairness from my whiteness, is I think what you're pointing to. So when I say things aren't fair, I may know them in some sort of up here way, but I don't know them in a real way where I'm fully impacted by it, right? So I think that's what I would say.
Can I tell just a quick question, quick story? So just equity. So I moved from California to some state that I won't name, and I had been like a major, like a manager at this company, and I, had all these awesome skills, and I moved to this city, and I apply for a job, and I send out my resume. I apply for all these jobs. I'm overqualified for most of them. I apply for all these jobs. They see my resume, they call me, they say, yeah, they screen me over the phone. It's like, hey, everything's awesome. Why don't you come in for that interview? And I walk into that room, and you see that look on their face. It was like, we are never hiring you in a million years. I could not get a job in that city in my profession because I sound the way I sound. I present the way I present. My resume looks awesome. And then once that Black person actually walked into the room, it was like, oh, all bets off. We didn't know it was you. You didn't tell us it was you. So you're not getting this job. Yeah. So that equity, fairness, and from, I want to say, from a white perspective, that's probably a story you don't hear. You don't know that story. You don't hear that that's what the experience that people are having. Yeah. Other than, and more. Right? And
more than not knowing that story, I think when you hear the story, I imagine there's a lot of intellectual or cerebral response, but when I hear the story, there's a visceral familiarity that comes up in my body. And when I think of equity, I definitely think of, the policies, the procedures, the protocols, the practices, all the P words that we need to be working on to make sure that there's access. But I also think of the word labor and all of the labor that people who have down power identities engage in that's uncompensated. So, I think we're all familiar with emotional labor, and in the places where you don't have power, you are constantly engaged in doing uncompensated labor to make sure that those around you who do have power stay comfortable. Because if they get uncomfortable, then your life gets difficult. So on a daily basis, people of color, women, non-cisgender folks are engaged in this additional labor that goes unrecognized and uncompensated of trying to make sure that even if they bring challenge, it's not enough challenge that they'll become a problem that needs to be solved, but yet creating enough challenge that maybe it becomes a slightly better place to work or there's slightly more freedom. So I think a lot about labor, what we consider work, who gets compensated for the work, and all the work that we do that goes unseen.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I go to solution even when sometimes I don't fully understand the problem. But a couple of things that I've learned along the way in the last few years is the importance of bilingual pay. And it's one of the practices that Out Boulder does. So if somebody is bilingual, they get they get paid more. They're an hourly person, they get $1 more per hour, kind of thing, to turn it into money. Because that's important, right? For access for everybody. So we do that. And the other thing a former board member brought to my attention, so one of the things about running nonprofits is you have to raise money, right? And so there's this white supremacist setup, right? So you want rich people on your board. Well, white people hold most of the money, right? And so you're set up in this kind of broken system. And so one of the things that nonprofits do is they have a give-get. It's common, right? In the group I worked for in New York City, it was $10,000 if you wanted to be on the board, right? And so when I got to Out Boulder County and finances were not great, and I'm like, we have to have a give-get, right? Well, what I did is I created a barrier, right? So we want money, and we also want diversity, and where's the value here, and what does that look like? And so the board a couple of years ago decided that instead of having individual give-get, there would be a board give-get. The board as a whole would be responsible. Mm-hmm. Some people have more money, but everybody gives, but to the level. And when Angie was saying something was like, one of the barriers that I had set up was, we're going to have this give-get, and I'll help you get to it, right? But that wasn't help. And so, those things, Beth's talking about iterative, it's like you do the best you can, and then when you figure out you're screwing up, guess what? Fix it.
Yeah.
And so those are some relatively recent, in the last few years, things that Out Boulder has done to correct our ways.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I want to throw in one more thing. I think corporations are struggling trying to address what you were bringing up, Regina. LinkedIn about a month ago did something kind of radical, and what they decided to do was for all of the global leaders of their employee resource group, so Black, African American, LGBTQ, and any other of their employee resource groups, those global leaders get an extra $10,000 on their salary. That's a lot of money. That's real money, as some people say. That's real money. I don't know who else has followed suit, but I think they probably did that in their own building awareness over the past year and a half. That is new. That's this spring. So
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, we'll shift to the I, equity, or inclusion. Thank you. And I'm going to match it with belonging, because lots of folks see those as very connected. And if you have experience with this, I've had many folks tell me that they've dropped the I and put the B in instead, and some are doing both. Some are not using belonging. But we'd love to just hear your perspectives on inclusion and belonging, their relationship, and how they work together, or maybe some of the problems there that those concepts have. I see some wheels moving. Angie, you want to start us?
Racing to the microphone. So, okay, I said that I thought that equity was the most difficult one. I changed my mind. I think belonging is a really, really challenging thing, right? So that the inclusion part, where we all want to feel like who we are and what we're doing, especially at work. It's like I show up to work and I want to feel like I'm a part of my team. My team values what I'm doing. Who I am is accepted, and and it's all kumbaya, and it's none of that's right. I mean, it's like I don't want to sound like a naysaying whoever I am. It's like, and I get along pretty well with people. But it's not like that. So the idea of and it just along the lines of what you had said earlier, Amy, where I think we've talked about this for years. That idea of when people say, so what did you do this weekend? And You have to figure out the terminology to say, my partner and I went to whatever it is, or whatever the thing is that you have to get to so that everybody feels comfortable, but you're not hiding anything. But then you have to watch for the people who are twitching and who just shut down and aren't, you're not going to hear from them for the next couple of weeks. And so it's a really complex place, because it's about being willing to be vulnerable and knowing that everybody is not going to show up there with you,
Yeah.
and still going anyway, right?
Yeah.
And that's a hard place, and I'm going to call myself out a little bit here, because I've been living in Longmont for almost 18 years, and I have flown under the radar. Just like, don't make waves, Angie, don't make waves. You're an engineer, just do your job, everybody's okay. Just like hang out with your drinking buddies, they're okay. We're gonna go to left hand, thank goodness they're a sponsor, I can say the name out loud. So, just stay under the radar, and I have to say that's part of what the George Floyd's murder, I have a hard time saying that. Every time I stumble on George Floyd's murder put me in a different place, where that get along and go along thing, it is not a comfortable space for me. I can't stay there. I'm shockingly enough, I'm sitting on this panel. Awesome. But, it's inclusion is a challenge for everybody involved. I have to be willing to go there, and I have to know that I'm challenging the people around there to go there with me. And if they don't, okay, I need to make note of that, where they are in their thing, and figure out how much more vulnerable I'm going to be with them. If they're not there, that might have to be how it is later.
Yeah.
It's like I've unfriended a few people over the last year. So it's a challenging place, and it's hard to, as an organization, to set up things where people get to be how they really are, and they feel that way. Back to the loud talking or whatever, it's like trying to learn how it is that people feel comfortable in whoever they are, and helping them feel comfortable, and not assuming that your straight white guy thing is the box that we all fit in, because we don't. And we've learned to fit in it. I know this place really well. I know how to do Angie Robinson, this engineer lady, PhD student person, and I'm trying to learn how to be not that, right? So it's really complex, because I'm uncomfortable, and in my discomfort I might disturb a lot more apple carts than I mean to, but that's where it is. It's like it's nothing. It's not well known. It's like I don't know where the sweet spots are for myself, so I'm still figuring it out. So we're taking this journey together. It's like all of us, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's right at the heart of it. Yeah. Thank you. I'm just gonna let that one sink in. I think you so well expressed what Regina was pointing to was the emotional labor, right? I think it really ties back to we don't actually know or understand what we're asking of people when we talk about these things in our underrepresented communities, right? And that somehow we're still asking underrepresented people to show up more and be on behalf of all of us that don't have that experience, right? I'll just share a personal anecdote too. Is like I've been out as gay for forever, like since college, right? I left home, had my first girlfriend my junior year in college. But being a non-binary person has been a whole nother coming out. Like I don't have to come out as same-sex attracted so much anymore, because I'll say me and my wife, right, being in a relationship privileges actually not having to come out so much, because I can say something about my wife. And we aren't even traditional people. I don't even like calling her my wife. I do that so people understand I'm in a same-sex relationship. And it takes a lot of courage, right? But to say I'm non-binary, I'm still learning about how to do that, how to show up with that, how to do that over and over again. And that's something pretty new in the last couple of years that I've known for a long time, but coming out as non-binary was like, oh, do I really have to do that? Will that make my life better? Like, it's a journey, so I can relate at least on that level. But from a race standpoint, I think you're really pointing to all of the underbelly of our culture and what we don't get in people's experience, the work it takes just to go do a job, you know? So.
I think what's interesting as I'm listening to you speak is I'm like, well, as a Black woman, I don't necessarily come out as a Black person, but in a certain way I do, because it's like, what kind of Black person are you going to be at work? Are you going to be the kind of Black person who does just kind of go along with the flow and try to fit in with the dominant cultural norms, or are you going to be the kind of Black person who challenges racism at the very first meeting that you're at? And so you do have these moments, and I think we have these ongoing moments when you're in a new context, or even if it's the same organization and you're sitting down with the same group of people and another microaggression, you know, is said, and you're like, am I gonna have the courage and put in the energy to confront this again? And so I think there is this process where of revealing who we are that we're always challenged with in the places where we have less power in our identities. Are we going to come out as this type of person? And are we going to claim, when we talk about belonging, I really love Brene Brown's ideas about belonging. And, you know, she has this quote that I have on my door that the first time I saw it, I found it very confrontational, because she says that our belonging and our self-worth are not goods to be negotiated with the world, and that no one belongs here more than you. And I read it and I was like, really? But I realized that I do have to claim my belonging. Yeah. And I have to choose that I belong wherever it is I go. And part of claiming my belonging is using my voice and my presence to disrupt the status quo and to call out things that are harmful, even if it's not for me, you know, to anyone in the room, because I've found that the more space I create for myself to be authentic, I'm creating more space for everyone, no matter what their identities are, to be authentic as well. And I think inclusion, you know, is the path to belonging. It's the activist part of what we do in our workspaces, and it involves transparency. The more transparent we are about the decisions that we're making and who has the power and who's getting paid what, the more people feel like they can trust each other and trust the space that we've created. And we also can't have inclusion without feedback and a culture of feedback. And if you're going to have a culture of feedback, then you also have to have a conflict positive culture, which I think is where the rubber really meets the road, is like all of this. We can't have, I have the privilege of working with Dr. Amanda Aguilera at Naropa, and she does a lot of work around restorative community, and we're trying to make Naropa a restorative university. And she says you can't have diversity. I mean, it means that there's going to be different expectations, different beliefs, different needs, different, you know, desires. And when you have that, you have conflict. So then once conflict arises, how you respond to conflict is really the practice of inclusion. Can you make space for conflict? Can you handle it in a way that doesn't other the perpetrator or the person causing harm? Can you repair conflict? Really will demonstrate whether or not you can create an inclusive community and therefore more opportunity for belonging. But I do think belonging isn't something that just exists. It's something that you have to claim over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, thank you for that. Any other thoughts on belonging, inclusion?
I'll just really appreciate your comments. Yeah. I want to go back and think about
those. Just set me back a little bit. Like that's
good
that's
stuff.
Meaty, yeah.
So this is going to feel like a non sequitur. Want to bring up the concept of the model minority. The model minority in belonging. So I'm Jewish. I have a Jewish identity. Shocker for Marty. I've known some of these people a number of years. I have Asian friends. We've talked about being the model minority and belonging. And what we've talked about among ourselves is sometimes we fit in really well. We fit in really well. We succeed in the white power structures, if you will. And then perhaps we outgrow our use. And so it's not a secure place. Suddenly there's all this anti-Asian violence, when before a lot of Asian folks in the US have been really celebrated and acknowledged and made to feel belonging. So it's an interesting thing. I hadn't really planned to speak about model minority, but I think it's a key piece, particularly where I sit, which is I'm part of this big majority of 74% white people in this country with all its rights and privileges, right? And also anti-Semitism is on the rise across the world, and it's vicious. And it's very, this is an overused word, but I mean it in its true form. It's triggering. It's triggering. And it's designed to trigger, right? Some oppressions like that are designed to just instill fear based on an historical fear. So I say that just to layer in the model minority stuff, because it is a key part, and I think when it's just another component of this big mosaic we're in, all trying to figure it out.
Please.
Wow, Amy, when you were talking about that, I took me back to a conversation I had with a trans person I know who does trainings. And people have their idea of what a trans person looks like, or what a trans person is. And is they're like held up as, you know, the model trans person, right? And as they were growing out their hair and being comfortable in their own, the struggle to, like, am I representing trans people right? Am I doing it the way, am I breaking these molds, and what does that feel like when you're held up as the, you know, the trans person doing this? And one of the things that, you know, talking about being model, and this, I'm certainly not equating this to race, but like being the model lesbian. Like, I'm dressed, right? I always dress when I go somewhere. It's like I'm trying to like open the door for everybody else who doesn't look like me. Like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be that perfect lesbian. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to say please. I'm going to have all the things my mother taught me at the ready. So it opens the door for somebody else. Mm-hmm. But it really is playing to that, you know, that model minority, even within our own movement. And it's so great when there are people who are not the model, right? But what is my piece in this, and opening the door as being that safe? Well, Marty's a lesbian. I like her, right? So anyway, that's all I have to add to all your very important comments. Thank you.
Yes, please.
You know,
I saw you kind of lurching for that microphone. I was waiting for you to grab it.
I just had a flip thing on that, because I don't know. See, I'm telling you, I think differently than everybody I know. So, I mean, because when I think of a model minority, I think of, that's the person I want to be like. And I'm so glad you're not doing that thing that I do, because I'm trying to learn from you. So for me, I'm looking for a different model. So to me, I'm looking for, you know, it's like, it is my honor to meet you, Regina. You know what I mean? It's like I'm meeting people and learning how to not be, you know, cis male white Angie. You know, so, and I need that. I need these lessons, and that's the modeling that I'm looking for. Thank you. So thank you for the modeling you're doing. Thank you for the modeling you're doing. I appreciate it. I need it.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm so full right now with what's being shared. So I just want to take a minute to take all that in. I think we do. It's again that trickery with ourselves to we belong enough. So then we say we belong, right? Because isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Like, isn't that what all this is about? Like, creating a sense of belonging, and then we assimilate to the idea while we secretly keep thinking about how alone and unrecognized we feel. So that I think is just part of my experience, and the experience that all of you are all sharing. So that's an important note. Regina, please.
Yeah, you know, I started this conversation thinking, you know, belonging was the outcome and inclusion was the action or the process. And as I'm listening, I'm like, oh no, belonging is a process as well. I mean, I talked about claiming it, but even as you're speaking about kind of model minorities, I'm realizing, the constant effort to liberate myself and to ask myself, like, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because my internalized oppression is saying I need to in order to avoid danger, which, on a daily basis, I'm sure a lot of people who have up power identities don't really think that going to work is dangerous. But, my DNA and my ancestral lineage tells me, looking a white person in the eyes and saying exactly what I think and feel at one point was, you could have died. And so there is this true nervous system activation when I am claiming my belonging. And so just to think about, like you said, we need mentors. We need people that reflect back to us that there are so many different ways to be, and that they're going to be courageous enough to show up in ways that we might still be on the edge of. Can I say that? Can I wear that? Can I move my body in this way? Can I raise my voice? Can I change my tone? And what I hear from a lot of folks is, can I say no? Can I say no to the labor that I'm constantly doing that really isn't recognized or compensated? Can I say no? And if I say no or I challenge someone, can I also not take care of them while they're having the experience of having been challenged? And that's a really hard edge for me as well, is like saying no, not caretaking folks who have more power than I do, trusting that they can get to the edge of their fragility and grow and develop if they choose to, and that all of that is the action of trying to belong, or not trying to belong, but belonging as an active verb. So really appreciating this conversation.
Yeah. I think I'll just make a note for our viewers that whether you're viewing this live with us now or on a recorded replay, we didn't rehearse this, right? So we all agreed to show up and engage in this way. And I think how to continue conversations like this, maybe where there's not cameras, that's really what I'm interested in doing. So if that speaks to you, you can reach out to someone here on this panel. We're all pretty available. Our bios are out there. And I am really actively interested in how we continue to create smaller communities where truth-telling and the exploration of these ideas are genuine, right? That we're not reading them from books or simply telling our personal stories for just the sake of that kind of sharing. It's like, can we look at those personal stories together and learn something from our individual stories that we carry? Because we all carry so many powerful stories. So I just think that was a really important note to make here. We've got one more in our acronym, and it's accessibility. So I'm going to kick this one off. Accessibility really is about our community members that are differently abled on lots of levels, right? Some of that can be unseen difference, and some of it can be very visible around how people are able to move in their body or not. I'm differently abled from being neuroatypical. I'm dyslexic, and so we have 3 panel members that are dyslexic in different forms. And what I've learned about dyslexia over the years, and I have so many strategies I've worked on to be able to be effective in my life, right, to work with my dyslexia. That dyslexia has its own unique properties. Every person I've shared that I'm dyslexic, and we start talking, there's similar things, and there are very different ways that dyslexia shows up. So just in that one thing, I'm learning something new about dyslexia all the time when I share it with someone and they say, oh, mine shows up like this. And I'm like, oh, mine doesn't actually do that, but it does this. And then they're like, oh, yeah, mine does that, but it does it like this. And I think that's just an important thing to add into the conversation, that all of difference is so nuanced and is so personally experienced. And getting to the level of having those conversations is really where we begin to understand and see each other in some different way, rather than all of the ways that we organize information in our brains to say, oh yeah, I know that experience, or I don't know that experience. So I'm really interested in layering in these nuanced pieces. So around ability, share some of your understandings and experiences there.
You go, Marty. I'll follow.
Yeah, you can.
I was just trying to help Beth out
I
there by
know,
jumping on the
said,
mic, but I'm trying to check myself. Okay, good.
Well, at first, as you were talking, I was thinking disability. And then as I was thinking, it was ability. Right? And so I think that is, access is around meeting different abilities, not about serving a disability. And so, one of the things that we were excited about at Boulder and in our Boulder office moving into a different space is there's a outdated, not ADA compliant ramp. Somebody could actually get into our space. Our other space, somebody couldn't get in.
Yeah.
And we serve community members who are in wheelchairs. And so, we needed to think about that. We're a small org, but how do we do that? So we widened some walls as we could allow, and some of those pieces. With our most recent hire in expanding our BIPOC programming was adding a Spanish language. So, and one of the things that's so great about my office right now, we have somebody who's from Colombia, somebody who's from Peru, and someone who's from Mexico. I walk into the room, I have no idea what's being said. And I am fine with that, as long as they don't say, and then Marty, which I can understand. And those probably happen outside, I don't know. But that's access, right? And so when somebody walks into Boulder, it used to be me hunting down Juan and can you take this call, right? And now, the phone gets answered and somebody could be met in the most common language spoken in Boulder County other than English, right? That's access. Access around, one of the things that there are a lot of folks who have noise stuff. And one of the stuff, because I'm a scientist, noise stuff, sensory overload.
Yes.
Right. I think that's probably closer to noise than noise stuff. And so, our space is small. And what does that look like when people come to groups? Some people can't. And so in coming out of the pandemic, it's what pieces did we learn during the pandemic that can serve populations that, serve populations that otherwise wouldn't be coming to Boulder County? Is it the rural piece? Is it the sensory overload piece? Is it the, perfume, somebody walks in with perfume and sends you over? These are things I learned, at going to Creating Change and those different pieces. The other thing that we learned through Zoom that Charlie and Juan got in place is captions that are on everything. We also figured out how to set up rooms for translation. So the speaker, I might be the speaker, I speak only English, that there's somebody who is culturally competent, more than competent, and has Spanish language. Those things we need to keep in place.
Yeah.
And so our team at Retreat was trying to figure out what that looks like and how you merge the two. But we learned a lot during the pandemic about how inaccessible we actually were when we thought we were being accessible.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think there are ways that we'll sort of start to round out our time here. We had planned to talk about how COVID has impacted DEIB and A, and there are ways that the pandemic certainly has made things more accessible, right? And it's that accessibility has actually hindered people being able to show up fully, right? They might be able to sign in through a Zoom or a Google Hangout or whatever, but can they really engage fully in that kind of ability to connect, right? So it's again, this false sense of connection that can happen. Regina, I'm going to give you the were you going to say something there? Okay. So I think that will kind of conclude our time. Regina, Marty, Angie, Amy, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing so openly with us. Your generosity and your sharing is something that I know I've appreciated, and I hope that our guests watching have appreciated as well. So I would love for folks listening to think about one small thing you can do today or this week to make your life more available to people different than you. It may be a movie that you watch that has people different than you in it, or you may actively choose to figure out a new friend that you want to make and try to figure out where that friend is going to be. Stay well read, stay well connected, and please continue these kinds of conversations. Reach out to any of us if we can be helpful to you. And thank you as we break now to go into the afternoon. And Lori Jones will be on as the moderator here just soon. Thanks so much.